All right, lesson 5. We're doing this to make sure we know about deductive and inductive um, argumentation. This chapter, chapter 3 in our textbook, is key for the rest of the term for this class on Introduction to Logic. It's fundamental to understand what we're doing with arguments and how we are identifying them, so we have to learn to evaluate them and do that well. A good argument with true premise has true premises and sound conclusions. And then they are as good as gold. Well, possibly. Like FedEx, Facebook, eBay, and Amazon, they all had good arguments for the company, but few bought into them at first. Now, they're some of the strongest companies in the world. Is your argument worthy of acceptance? It could be worth some money. But it's about business and economics, and we're away from that. We're devising an argument, or forming one, to see if your claim is worthy of acceptance. An evaluating argument takes understanding what the argument is about. It's recognizing its flaws and credentials, and asking this question, is it worthy of acceptance? If your argument is good, it's a good deal. If it's bad, then, well, maybe it's a bad deal. It's not, it might be not worthy, and it might be a good argument and worthy, but we'll see. So let's take a look. The point of this is to make sure we are prepared to get acceptance of our argument. All right, so I didn't change the slides. I'm not going to start over. Been frustrated all day creating this video, so here we go. Deductive arguments are intended to provide conclusive support for the conclusions that they have. Okay, it succeeds in providing conclusive support for its premises if they're said to be valid. A valid argument is such that if its premises are true, this is a big if, by the way. Should probably highlight that. If the premises are true, its conclusions must be true. And then a deductively valid argument has true premises and is said to be sound. That it makes sense. Everything comes together. It's a great argument. A deductive argument example is here. It's not in the book, but you'll see this. It looks kind of like a math thing. We're looking, and just remember, we're looking for proof. These arguments are trying to prove something, especially deductive arguments. But here's the basic arrangement of the argument. If P, then Q, P, then Q. I mean, basically, the conclusion is in the premise. If Socrates is a man, then he is mortal. Socrates is human, or he is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. That's a great, valid argument. It makes sense if we're evaluating it. It stands to reason. It's valid and sound. So a deductive argument is either valid or invalid. It's not an invalid, but it could be if it's a real bad argument, maybe just standing on half a leg. But if it is a good argument, it's, excuse me, it is truth preserving and sound. Sound argument is truth preserving. A deductive argument can be valid and not true. So a deductive argument could be valid, yet be false. We're given some examples here, and here it is. All dogs have fleas. Browser is a dog. Therefore, browser has fleas. These things lead one to another, and in the conclusion then, therefore, browser has fleas. That is a valid argument. That's not a sound one. It doesn't make sense. If you've been a dog owner, you know, you want to get fleas off, and you do. You do everything you can to have them not have fleas. So we know some dogs don't have fleas. So this premise number one is susceptible to maybe being untrue, right? Browser is a dog, if that's what you've chosen to name your dog, then I don't know how to back up. Let's see if I can do that. Nope, I cannot. So we're just going to plow forward. But to say all dogs have fleas, I don't think we would agree with that. So deductively, from a deductive argument, valid arguments can have false premises and a false conclusion. They can have a false premises with a true conclusion. They have true premises with a true conclusion. And leads us, but a deductive valid argument cannot have ever true premises with a false conclusion. And when it does, when it's this one here, it is sound. Some deductively valid arguments look something like this, and they may not be very sound, but they are valid. So browser is a cat, all cats bark, therefore browser barks. If browser is in fact something that barks and cats bark, then browser barks. But to say he's a cat, I think most of us would say, I think maybe our first gut reaction would be to say that's an invalid, but no, it's a valid argument. We just recognize it is not sound. It's not reasonable. You can't prove that. In fact, we could probably prove otherwise. Here's another one. All human beings are free. Anna is a human being, so Anna is free. Again, a very valid argument. However, we know some human beings are not free. Did you realize there's still slavery going on in the world? There is such thing called sex slaves. There are other slaves in other parts of the world. We live in a free country. But nonetheless, it's still a valid argument, whether you like what it's talking about or not. And then here, if Austin is happy, then Barb is happy. Barb is not happy, therefore Austin is not happy. We'll talk about a variety of deductive arguments, as you might know some already. But this isn't a syllogism, not a straightforward one anyway. If Austin is happy, at least it's not a modus ponens. It is Austin is happy, then Barb is happy. She's not happy, therefore Austin is not happy. It's a different form of but it's still valid as far as an argument goes. Now here's some zany deductive arguments. Sam is always where Ben is. Sam is in the library, so Ben is also in the library. We might know some people that are really close to each other and they seem to go wherever the other one goes. But to say always, that means all the time, 24/7. That's a bit of a stretch. Now, unless maybe Sam and Ben are conjoined twins, then we could say that. But the likelihood of that just doesn't seem like this is a very sound argument. Now here, think about this one. This dog always barks when someone is at the door. The dog has not barked, therefore There's no one at the door. It's a valid argument. How? Maybe could we conclude that this is unsound? Think about it. This dog always barks when someone's at the door. He's not barking, so therefore no one's at the door, right? Maybe someone could sneak up on the dog. Or maybe the dog is asleep. I mean, there could be all sorts of things, but we have one more. So it's not necessarily true, but it is a valid argument. It's not necessarily a true conclusion. Flight attendants know how to swim. All flight attendants know how to swim. Ralph knows how to swim, hence Ralph is a flight attendant. Okay, if you remember the first thing I showed you, if P then Q. If P would be all flight attendants, then Q know how to swim. P then Q, but that's not what this is. This is Q then P, and that doesn't follow. It might, but it's not necessarily so. But aside from that, still it's a deductive argument and it is valid. But that doesn't mean it's sound, okay? At least we'll look into its validity later. It's following the proper argumentation of a deductive argument. The lack of an argument, there are a massive amount of persuasive arguments going on. A lot of people just say stuff and try to persuade you, and it's called rhetoric. And again, the textbook doesn't talk about that, but that's really what a good amount of persuasion is. We're not into persuading in this class. Now, you might use an argument to persuade. We're not about persuasion. That would be more in the English class. In the logic arena, though, we're using logic maybe to help people understand certain things, and it might be helpful then to persuade them. But rhetoric is what the wider picture and the bigger picture of this kind of persuasion is about. But we're looking at arguments. So many people, include some very good writers included, think that if they clearly express their opinions, then they have given an argument, and that's just not so. An argument requires an action or some sort of claim. It's not just a bunch of hubba bubba stuff. It's not just information, not declarative statements. It's not just making angry accusations. Sometimes opinions are so weakly supported that they're almost indistinguishable from completely unsupported opinions. But so we need support and good rhetoric. Again, we're not doing rhetoric, but this is our support engagement. And that's what we're doing for possibly using these deductive statements for a good rhetorician, maybe. Inductive arguments are very different than deductive ones. They're less specific, and they don't necessarily follow that the conclusion comes exactly from the premises, and they must, where in deduction, the conclusion must absolutely follow the premises. Here, we're just looking for support. We're maybe looking for, and as in this first case, 95%. We're giving more support than less, and so inductive arguments are weak and strong. They're not valid or invalid, and they are cogent. But we'll get to that, and 95% of the dogs have fleas. Therefore, Browser, my dog, is very likely to have fleas. Yeah. Now that is a better argument than the other one. that was valid, but still not a good argument. Here you have a stronger argument because we're weighing in on the percentages, the likelihood, the possibility, the plausibility. These kinds of words are lent toward inductive arguments. An inductive argument that succeeds in providing very probable support for its conclusion is said to be strong. So we want strong inductive arguments, not weak ones. And hopefully the strong argument with true premises lends for the conclusion. It supports the conclusion so much that it's most likely or very probably true, but not necessarily. It'll never be necessary. Not in an inductive argument. In a deductive argument, it will be necessary. An inductive argument, a strong argument with true premises, are to be called cogent. So a deductive argument is either, and this is just looking at the terms overall, just a reminder as a review, they're either valid or invalid. And a good argument is considered sound, or it's unsound if it's bad. But for an inductive argument, it is either weak or strong, and a good inductive argument is cogent. I'm going to lean toward, because I've really looked at this, and I've talked to a few people, but I'm going to lean toward saying that there is no such thing as a cogent bad argument. Think about that. You can get back with me. Maybe that could be an assignment to find with absolute certainty, can you have a cogent bad argument? That means that there are true premises, but they come to a false conclusion, I guess, because the conclusion would have to be a good argument. You'd have to have a good conclusion, a strong conclusion for a good argument. But to have strong cogency, so to speak, it has to have true premises. Deductive and inductive arguments about lipstick. So here we're going to do some contrasting arguments, okay? I want to show you the difference about a lipstick in this case, the difference between inductive and deductive arguments. The first lipstick I pulled from my bag is red. The second lipstick I pulled from my bag is red. Therefore, all the lipsticks in my bag are red. Now, that might be true. What other color lipstick might there be in the bag? Well, I don't know. It's not my bag. I don't carry lipstick. But hey, I have a suspicion that maybe there's clear or glossy or pink or something different than just the red that this is mentioning. But this is an inductive argument, okay? How do we make this deductive? Now let's make the argument deductive with the same kind of setting here. It's deductive here. The first lipstick I pulled from my bag is red. All lipsticks in my bag are red. Therefore, the second lipstick I will pull from my bag will be red too. So that's because we recognize some major change is right here in the word all. Now remember in a deductive argument that if all the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. And if all the premises, there's red lipstick, I mean, you don't even have to have more than this one. All lipstick in my bag are red. If that's true, it doesn't matter if it's the first, second, fifth, 20th. Every lipstick you come out will be red. But induction, all we do here is find that it is either strong or weak, and it could be strong. Maybe the whole bag is full of lipstick. Be a big bag or maybe a lot of little lipstick things. Don't know. But recognize in induction it's either weak or strong, and cogent, which here, are they cogent? Are the premises cogent? Yes, they are cogent because they're based on the past experience. The first lipstick was red, the second lipstick was red, therefore. Now, we don't know. Maybe it just happened to be two random sticks and there was 40 pieces of lipstick in there, and the other 38 were blue, purple, and green. Strange colors for lipstick, but nonetheless, we don't know, but it's could be reasonable. Maybe if we're an investigator on a case, and it would depend on who we're talking about and where it was found, maybe who was there, and they could give some credence to that. This could be a very strong case, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's strong. But it's either weak or strong. And so let's look at the next one. Here's about hair. My mother is Irish. She has blonde hair. Therefore, everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. And I bet you're shaking your head, right? You're thinking, I don't think so. I've been to Ireland. I didn't see a lot of red-haired people, but there are some there. I took a red-haired person with me, and they assumed he was Irish and started talking to him in Gaelic. And I thought it was funny. It was my son, Joshua. But he said, what? And they backed up and didn't talk to him anymore. But this is strong, weak, valid, invalid. Because it's an inductive, it is, yeah, it's either strong or weak, possibly cogent. The two premises are cogent because they're both true. My mother is Irish and she has blonde hair. Now, it's quite at the stretch now to be saying that everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. That's just quite the stretch. So I can't see that the cogency of this makes it a strong argument. And I still think it's weak. Now, how do you make that as a deductive argument? Well, here it is. My mother is Irish. Everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. Therefore, my mother has blonde hair. Again, the difference is the second statement. She has blonde hair, an inductive, where everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. Now, the question will be, my mother is Irish. Only he would know, and his mom and the family members and that sort of thing would know this. Let's assume it's true. If this is true as well, everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. The conclusion must be what? That they have blonde hair. But what we don't really terribly agree on maybe is the second premise, that everyone from Ireland has blonde hair. I just don't think that is the case. And in fact, I think we'd really be precedent if we were saying people from anywhere has any kind of particular color of hair. Now, that could be the case maybe in Africa. But nonetheless, it wouldn't be blonde. And there are possibilities for other things. So while the second one, the deductive, is valid, it's not necessarily, it is not sound. Okay, let's look at another one, comparing the two. And we're going to take a look here. All of our snowstorms come from the north. It's starting to snow, therefore the storm is coming from the north. This is a deductive argument because there's two premises, and the conclusion absolutely comes from those premises. All of the snowstorms come from north if that is the case. Now, we're evaluating it. Is that really the case? No, I don't think so. I have known some to come from the south, and usually when they do, they have a lot more snow in them, and it's wet. That's from Kansas. When we lived in Wisconsin, all the snow came from the west, not from the north. But at any rate, the storm is coming from the north is conclusion from the first two premises. It's valid argument, but it's not necessarily absolutely true. It is valid, but there are possibilities that make it unsound. So the inductive part is changing these words to taking out the all and then saying most. Most of the snowstorms come from the north. It's starting to snow. Both are the same in both arguments. This snowstorm must be coming from the north. So going on. Another look and comparison of these two, inductive and deductive. Maximilian is a shelter dog. He is happy. All shelter dogs are happy. That's an inductive argument. It's not necessarily saying anything, making a bunch of statements, putting them together. And the idea, he's a shelter dog and he is happy, so therefore maybe all shelter dogs are happy. But so in the deductive argument, Maximilian is a shelter dog. All shelter dogs are happy. That's where it's changed. It went from he to all shelter dogs. Therefore, he is happy. And that is a absolute true conclusion. It's a valid argument. And the conclusion stems from the premises. But is it sound? Is that a good argument? I think we would say not, because a lot of people would object to this. All shelter dogs are happy. I would say that is not the case. All right, going on. And here's a breakdown of these arguments and the way these words are used. An inference, is it valid or invalid? You can see the top ones are sound, valid, not sound, and these look to be deductive versus, oh, I'm not using the pointer properly. These seem to be deductive, and then these here seem to be inductive. So at any rate, that is one way to look at it. Here's yet another, a little bit more clear maybe for you. It's a tree of arguments, the deductive versus inductive. Deductive on your left, they're valid or invalid. If it's invalid, it's unsound already. It's valid, it might be sound, hoping it is. And that's what we're looking for, sound arguments. It's got to be valid, and it must have true premises with a true conclusion. That makes it a sound argument. It may be valid and still be unsound. On the deductive area, very similar. If it's cogent, it seems to not be able to be weak. It's not cogent, because they're probably bad. With the inductive, usually what makes it to be not cogent is the conclusion is false. But it could have a false premise as well. So, but if it has to, in order to be cogent, it has to both have, it has to have true premises. Okay, and that's what we're learning to evaluate. Can these premises, are we looking at these things? Do they seem worthy of acceptance? Can Can we believe that? Are they believable? Does it prove the conclusion? Do these things work together? So here, judging the arguments, we're going to look at whether an argument is deductive or inductive first, and then if it gives good reasons for accepting the conclusions. And this was the one assignment out of chapter 3 that has been challenging. So let's look at it. Find the argument's conclusion and then its premises. Step 1, there are 4 steps to judging an argument, and these 4 steps start with this one concept of finding the argument, the premises and the conclusion. You need to look at those, find them, write them down. This always helps, writing things down. If you're trying to do these assignments just all in your head, I think you're going to be really sorry. You won't learn as much and it won't be as good for you. Find the argument's conclusion and premises. Step 2, then ask if this is the case. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Then what argument are we looking for? And most likely to be, if that's the case, it would be deductive. So you're looking to first see if it's a deductive argument. They're not something we use around the supper table or the dinner table or whatever. We don't sit around and make up deductive arguments in the house. We use inductive all the time. But can this be created and made into a deductive form to create a must-true conclusion? If so, then you're done. All right, you don't need to go any further, but if it doesn't, then you need to ask. Let's see, we're still deciding if it's a really good argument or not. Then we have to go to this next step is is it the case that the premises are true, its conclusion is probably or most likely to be true? Well, okay. Yeah, so if it is, it's inductive. Okay, and then we need one final question. Is it worthy of acceptance? Is the argument intended to offer a conclusion, offer a conclusive or probable support for the conclusion, but fails to do so? There are several that might. We'll take a look at these. But we have to identify the premises and the conclusion, see if it's deductive, see if it's inductive, and then see if it's a good or bad argument. So let's evaluate a couple arguments you have not seen in the book. Mark has twice as many cats as Susan. Susan has 3 cats. Therefore, Mark has how many cats? So you have to multiply 3 cats since he has twice as many by 2. And so he has 6 cats, right? This is math. A lot of our logic is based on math. But we're looking for these, and actually this would be an enthymeme. We are looking for a premise that isn't found. It's implied, it's implicit. So all students are rich people, and some students do volunteer to work. Therefore, some rich people do volunteer work. So on the very first one, the enthymeme is that, or not the conclusion rather, it's not the enthymeme. I'm sorry. The conclusion is there are 6 cats Mark has, because it's telling you what the deal is, and we're searching for the conclusion. We just multiply. But here's a thing that doesn't require math. All students are rich people. Some students do volunteer work, so some rich people volunteer work, right? Now here we have 2 premises. All students are rich people, I think a lot of us would say, no, they're not. And some students do volunteer work. Okay, possible. You may volunteer your blood even. Therefore, some rich people do volunteer work. It has a good conclusion, probably a true one, and there's one true premise, but this first premise is a bit unlikely, isn't it? We borrow money, we scrape. I knew a student once who didn't even go to KU on a scholarship because the scholarship wasn't enough to pay for his schooling. So let's evaluate another argument. Here's the English and England and the heat. Summer. In the summer, Death Valley always includes at least 10 days above 100 degrees. This summer in Death Valley, there will be at least 10 days above 100 degrees. Okay. It may. And that's hot. I don't like that kind of heat. Here's one about the English class. Every class I've taken in English department has been a piece of cake. So all English classes are probably easy. I don't think that would necessarily follow, does it? Every class I've taken in English department has been a piece of cake? Okay, maybe. Very good. Good for you, I guess. You got A's, right? So all English classes are probably easy. That doesn't necessarily follow. You may have just hit and missed, right? So that would be an inductive. And we have a true premise. Can't deny that one. The class you took, it was a piece of cake. Okay, good for you. There are no other premises, but it's jumping to a conclusion that all classes are probably easy. And that doesn't seem very reasonable. If you evaluate that or think through this argument as an inductive argument, not likely. The last one here, Coleridge is a poet from England and Blake is a poet from England. So we have two poets. Those are two premises. They're true. We'll assume they're true. So what's the conclusion? Their poems are surely very similar. Okay. Key here is the surely, very similar. So they're not saying they're exact. They might be similar. But it doesn't sound like it's trying to come to a firm conclusion, an absolute deductive thing, so it's not deductive. It'd be inductive. And I'm thinking, what does their poem's similarity have to do with the fact that they're from England? I don't think that has anything to do with anything. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they're English. So it is an inductive argument. The premises are true, so it's cogent, but its conclusion is false. I mean, not necessarily false, but it's really weak. I'd say this is a bad argument. Okay, so the keywords we're looking at have been deductive and inductive. And they have some keywords that indicate whether they are those kinds of arguments or not. But this isn't foolproof, and it can be misleading. Some people may use those words, especially in rhetoric. They'll use those words, absolutely, you've got to believe that. And when it's an inductive argument, and they're not really, it's not a very good one. So just because they say necessarily follows or logically or therefore or necessarily or absolutely, that doesn't mean anything. Those are rhetoric words that people are trying to persuade. And this is the reason I bring this up with rhetoric. When we're judging arguments, we're finding it in narrative. Sometimes people that are trying to make it sound better than it really is, or worse than it really is. They're just throwing out words to trying to get people follow them or not follow somebody else or something like that. But these are clue words. It's just not foolproof. Okay. Likely, probably, it's chances. We do recognize then inductive argumentation has to do with the idea of chance or the probability or plausibility. It's not absolute. The real difference between the two. And I often think of the deductive argument as very certain. With inductive, you just have a whole bunch of lineup of things and hoping that this catches their attention. And that's kind of what happens a lot of times when we make our own arguments. But here, now here we have the idea of enthymemes. That they're looking for an implied premise. And I want you to look for the implied premise in these slides, just a couple of them. All dogs have fleas, so therefore browser has fleas. What's the missing premise? Now you've heard this one. You probably already know it, which is a good thing. But it is that browser is a dog. Pretty simple. How about all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal? Sometimes we don't say these because they're just terribly obvious. Sometimes we don't use these implied premises because we might think it wastes our time. But the understanding is that all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal, is that Socrates is a man, right? So, and there may be other reasons people have implied premises, but we don't know. Just have to work with what you get. Okay. Finding the implied or the implicit premises, here we search for a credible premise that would make the argument valid. Okay, we're trying to help them prove something out of what they've given us. Choose the supplied premise that is most plausible and fits best with their intent. Okay, and it would make sense that if they're saying all dogs have fleas, therefore browser has fleas, he must be assuming, and we're reading into it, that, okay, browser is a dog. Okay. Next, we need to search for the credible premise that would make the argument as strong as possible. And choose the supplied premise that fulfills stipulations A and B. Found above, evaluate the reconstituted argument and see if it works, as long as we're not putting anything into it that shouldn't be there. Here's an enthymeme. He's a U.S. citizen, so he's entitled to due process. What's the missing implicit premise? If he's a U.S. citizen, that's one. The conclusion is, so he's entitled to due process. Oh, put them together, you have the implied or the missing, the enthymeme is that all U.S. citizens are entitled to due process, so therefore he's entitled to due process. Well, here's another one. Where there is fire, there's smoke. And a lot of times we say it the other way. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Indicating what? Well, fire produces smoke, right? So that's the enthymeme that's missing. A couple others. List argument, an unstated purpose. Here's one that's in the book, the easy availability of assault rifles in the United States increase the risk of death and injury for society as a whole. Therefore, assault rifles, can't speak now, should be banned. Say some people might just jump on that. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, because there's an understood premise that hasn't been said. It's implicit. It's an enthymeme. And that is anything that increases the risk of death and injury for society as a whole should be banned. So the same kind of argument people will make that, oh, we shouldn't drive cars. Less people die in an airplane than in cars, but nonetheless, that doesn't matter. For this particular argument, we have this implied premise here. Okay, writing out the found implicit premises. I think we have kind of done that, but here are some guidelines for us. Well, for this particular thought, assault rifles in the USA are made easily available. Anything that increases the risk of death and injury should be banned. That's the one that wasn't there. Assault rifles risk that, so they need to, therefore they should be banned. Kind of maybe two premises the way he wrote it out here. Some long arguments, assessing them. Only a small portion of prose may contain statements that serve as premises or a conclusion. The premises or conclusions may be implied, implicit, and many longer works supporting to be filled with arguments contain very few arguments or maybe none at all. So in prose and different kind of narrative, people don't really have a good argument. They just have a bunch of words. But assessing them, we need to do these 3 steps, okay, to finish out this video. Study the text until you understand it fully, okay? Find the conclusion and identify the premises. And then we would go back to the 4-step process in evaluating or judging the arguments, which would, we have to start off, think about this and remember this, because you're going to be using this the rest of the semester. First, find whether or not it's a deductive or inductive argument. You're going to have to actually, the very first thing, find the premises, just like here in the conclusion. This is what we're doing for long arguments. The first thing, you need to understand what they're trying to do, what's the case, and then look if it's deductive, number 2, and then number 3, see if it's inductive. If it's deductively valid, then your search is dropped. You don't need to do any more. If it's inductively weak, you might need to do that, but if it's, and backing up, if it's deductively valid, it might be, or rather invalid, you might have to go back and rework things and see if it's sound or unsound, or if it's weak, strong, if it's cogent or not cogent. So here for the final part of our video is summarize a video. Remember, I like comprehensive and concise summaries. Be sure to do a post on Thursday and Sunday. Do it earlier on both if you want. Be sure to do a post and then a reply. So 2 replies, 1 post. And do the worksheet, complete the exercises as outlined, and I will give you some, and then follow up with a quiz. Have a good one.